Yeah, give them.
We're going to start out by having everybody rise for the national anthem. We're going to face due north to those flags over the top of that black trailer right there.
I was wondering the same thing. I was like, where's the flag?
We get started here. I want to take a second and welcome our judge, Mr. Mike Klusky, back for another year. Matt Harris from New Albany, Ohio. He's been judging cattle for well over 20 years. Matt grew up on a club calf and seed stock operation of Maine Azure and Hereford cattle, where he actively participated in 4-H and exhibited both breeding cattle and market steers across the country for numerous years, participating in both jackpot and breeding cattle shows. Matt holds a bachelor's degree in animal science, agribusiness from Ohio State University, and a master's degree in agriculture and environmental science education from West Virginia University. Currently, he works as the Chief Program Specialist for Production Adjustment, Compliance, and Risk Management section of the USDA for the Ohio State Farm Service Agency. Previously, he worked with the Ohio Cattlemen's Association and Ohio Beef Council, where he coordinated the Ohio Beef Expo Junior Steer and Heifer Show. Mr. Matt Cluskey. And coming in the gate now, we have our breeding heifers, class 003.
Here as we start off here in your heifer show here this morning. As we start off in this class, the young man's female that's going to lead off the class here in my mind, just a really big rib, big volume type of a female that blends together pretty well here in this particular lineup. I think for me, when she comes at you, she's got a lot of volume and capacity to her, a lot of power right through that chest floor and on into that forerib, but really internally a lot of internal shape and dimension to that rib cage. And when you get right behind her, she's stout enough made, but she's made in terms of the way she comes out of that hip level enough from hooks to pins, but she maintains some femininity as well when we get her out here. So a very complete type of female there to lead off your class. Young man's female that's going to be next here in this lineup, I like her in terms of balance as well. I think certainly she's a female that's up-headed enough to give you some femininity out of that front end. Maybe not quite as long-bodied from flank to flank as that female that's going to lead off the class. And when you get right behind her, maybe not as completely stout or carrying as much complete stoutness when we get right behind her. But I think certainly when you get her onto the profile there, she's a big rib type of a female as well. She's deep enough body, deep enough flank, and you like her balance and her style off of both ends there towards the top of the class. So a nice female in that lineup as well there in that second spot. Young man's calf that comes next in this lineup, heavy enough muscle type of a calf that I like in terms of her muscle shape down that top line. I think she gives you some thickness in that center quarter, some thickness and dimension down into that lower stifle. Not as evenly balanced as those two females that are going to lead off the class. She gets a little bolder, a little coarser about that shoulder, a little heavier down deep into that brisket. And when we take her out on the move, a little more toed out off those back legs when we put her into motion, but you appreciate the way she carries that overall skeletal width and dimension and that thickness down that top line. Young lady's female that comes next in this lineup, a stylish enough made type of a female. I think she's long-bodied, long-topped. I think she's level enough down that front, level enough into the top of that shoulder. If I get critical of her at this point, I think she gets just a little tighter rib. She's not as deep-bodied, not as deep flanked, not as loose about her overall rib shape and dimension as some of those other females that are going to beat her here in this go-around. The young lady's female that's next in the lineup, kind of like the calf right in front of her in terms of length of body. I think she gives you enough length from flank to flank. I think she's smooth enough into that shoulder. I think she's up-headed enough when you get right out of the top of that shoulder. But like that female right in front of her, just gets a little tubier about her rib shape there, not as loose rib, not as loose volume, and at times maybe gets a little more down right at the point of that hip. But I think certainly a female on that profile, she's long-bodied, that you appreciate that length of side from flank to flank. Young lady's calf that's next in this lineup, it's kind of the challenging calf here in this particular lineup. I think certainly she gives you some depth of flank to her. She gives you some rear rib shape to her. Now the way she comes together, they're not as evenly balanced as some of those other females there. I think she gets a little bolder as she goes right into the top of that shoulder, a little more pronounced right at the top of that shoulder, a little rounder about that front end, and at times wants to get down just a tick right at the point of that hip. But I think certainly a female that does give you some evidence of depth of body and depth of flank that you do appreciate, and that overall volume that she carries in the go round. Young lady's calf that comes next in the lineup, not as evenly balanced here in this particular go round, a little coarser fronted, a little bolder about that shoulder, gets a little tighter, a little more refined about that forerib as we get right up into that front end. But a nice set of calves there on that heifer side of things. So let's give all those exhibitors another nice big round of applause. Thanks.
We have our progress market steer coming in now, Emerson Thompson.
Oh. You need the gate open, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I might do that. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. That's your challenge. You're the only one in the class, you got to figure out how to get in, right?
Do it right?
Yeah.
Nice big round of applause here in this particular go around. A single entry here in this class. I think she did a nice job here getting out here. Camp that in this go around, I think is complete enough in his type and kind. I think level enough down that top, level enough out of that hip. Completes himself in terms of the way he lines up on that profile. I think smooth enough shoulder, long enough fronted. A camp that gives you some depth of body and spring of rib, or start to give you some internal rib shape to him as well. But walks well enough when we get him out in that motion. He's long enough made, long enough moving when we get him out here. So a nice single entry here in the lineup. Let's give her a nice big round of applause. Pause here as we come into this first class here in this farm-raised division here in the steer show. I think a nice job by these young folks here in this particular go-round. And as we start off on this top end of this class, the young man's calf that's going to lead off the class, just a really complete made type of a calf in this go-round. I think for me, when you start to analyze him, you put some parts and pieces together there. He's heavy enough muscle down that top. He's heavy enough out of that hip in terms of thickness and dimension out of that hip. When you get right behind him, I think he has an advantage. He carries a little more muscle shape and expression in that center quarter. And he carries that down to a wider base when we get down to those feet and legs on the ground. Now, when you put your hands on him, too, I think for me, he's a little more ideally finished in this particular go-round, a little more evenly finished here in this lineup when you start to handle him towards that 12th and 13th rib. Just a calf that's pushing some fat and finish to him there. He's got a lot of volume and capacity to him and balances up well here in the go-round. And for me, that's where he's going to end up leading off the class here in this go-round. Young lady's black and white calf that comes next here in this particular lineup, a calf that I like in terms of depth of body. I think certainly he gives you some depth of flank. He gives you some internal shape and dimension to him as well. He's stylish enough in his type and kind, especially as you get up onto that front end. You know, he starts to give you that meat animal shape to him. He gives you some power into that forerib. Now, at times when we put him into motion, I do think he starts to get just a tick rounder out of that hip, a little rounder when we start to put him into motion, the way he moves and stretches those back legs there. Now, when you start to handle him there, maybe he's a little softer about that finish and maybe a little patchier about that finish in comparison to that class winner, but that's getting critical because I think this guy, you know, he's pushing enough weight. You're comfortable where he's going onto the rail. He's got some stoutness when you get up into that front end. Just maybe, in my mind, not as evenly balanced as that young man's calf that's going to lead off the class here in this go-around, but a calf that you do like in terms of his overall volume and capacity.
Can we get the ribbon placement before
Yes.
we
here, the young man's calf that comes in the go-round, an evenly balanced enough type of a calf that I like in terms of his up-headedness. I think he balances up extremely well. I think he's level down that top, level enough out of that hip. Now, we're going to get a little critical of him as I'd like to see him pushing just a little more weight in comparison to those top two calves here in this go-round, maybe pushing a little more finish in comparison to those two calves. But I think when you start talking about correctness, a calf that gives you some completeness when you put him into motion and some style and balance when you get him onto the profile. Young lady's calf that's going to be next here in this lineup, the white sock type calf, a calf that I like in terms of balance as well. I think certainly he's up-headed enough, he's level enough down that top, he's level enough out of that hip. In this class, like I said, I just like to see him, maybe like the calf right in front of me, pushing just a little more weight to him here. He's getting in the 1100s there, you know, as a fat finished steer. I'd like to see him pushing a little more to him in terms of overall fat towards that 12th and 13th rib, but he's an evenly enough balanced type of a calf, an up-headed enough type of a calf, a smooth enough made type of a calf that you like him here in this particular go-round. Red calf that comes next here in this particular lineup, a deep enough body type of a calf that gives you some overall rib shape and dimension to him. You know, not as much of him here in this particular class in comparison to some of those other calves, but he's giving you some turn of rear rib shape and gives you some flank and gives you some overall internal shape and dimension that you appreciate in the lineup. Then the young lady's calf that comes next in the lineup, deep enough sided type of a calf, just a lighter weighted type of a calf here in this particular go-round, a little barer handling, a little flatter about that overall muscle shape into that forerib and through that chest floor in comparison to some of those other calves. But a nice set of calves there in your show here to start off this division. So let's give them one more nice big round of applause. There's a nice big round of applause here as we come into this next class here in this market steer division. I think a nice job here in this particular go round. I think some cattle that are starting to put some weight onto them, you know, as we start to handle them down through this class. Some differences in how they are putting fat and finish on, and some differences in how they're handling. But for me in this particular lineup, the young lady's calf that's going to lead off the class here, I think for me really handles the best in this particular go round. I think he's more uniformly finished towards that 12th and 13th rib. I think he balances up well enough in terms of the way he comes in here. He gives you enough skeletal width and dimension through that chest floor. He gives you enough thickness out of the top of that shoulder. He gives you enough thickness out of that hip. I think for me, he starts to give you that overall looseness of internal shape and dimension of rib as well. But just for me, balances up a little more evenly than some of these other calves here in this go round, and has that combination of muscle shape that you appreciate, and the way that he handles you appreciate the fat and finish here in this go round. So for me, that's where he comes to the top of this particular class. The young man's calf that comes next in this lineup, a balanced enough type of a calf. I think certainly on that profile, he's long bodied, he's long made. Nice job. He's long bodied, he's long made. I think certainly long enough down that top. Now, you start to handle him there a little bit. Maybe he starts to get just a tick softer when you get into that fat and finish right at that top and kind of right at the top of that loin edge. And I think when you get right behind him, at times maybe wants to narrow up just a tick when we get down to those lower base feet and legs. But he balances up extremely well here in this go round. I think for me in that profile, he's headed enough, he's long enough top. He's a little more evenly balanced than some of the other calves here in this go round, and that's where he finds his way towards the top end of that class. Young man's calf that comes next in this lineup, a big body type of a calf on that standstill I really like in terms of depth of body, depth of flank. I think he gives you a lot of boldness, a lot of rib shape to him. Now he is getting a little softer made right into that forerib, just a little heavier down through that chest floor and a little heavier into that brisket, and at times gets a little shorter strided when we put him into motion off those back legs. But in terms of where he's at, in terms of skeletal width and dimension through that chest floor, you really appreciate him. You really appreciate that internal volume and capacity to him, just maybe getting a little bit overdone in terms of a little softness right into that forerib, right into the top of that shoulder and into that lower brisket. But a nice calf here in this go round as well, that it gives you enough dimension to him and gives you enough thickness out of that hip. So as we come into that next class, the next young lady's calf here in this particular class, a calf that I like in terms of muscle shape and thickness. I think certainly he gives you enough dimension down that top. He gives you enough thickness in that center quarter. Now where I get a little critical of him, I don't think he's pushing as much fat and finish to him as those other steers in front of him there. I think he gets a little, he's not pushing that softness to him towards that 12th and 13th rib. Maybe just a little tighter about that flank as well, but I think certainly a calf that you appreciate in terms of overall skeletal width and dimension and thickness and muscle shape down that top. Young lady's calf that comes next in this lineup, an up-headed enough type of a calf that gives you some completeness out of that shoulder. You like him down to that front end. I think he's long enough fronted. I think he's long enough top, long enough spine. Maybe just like to see a little more of him, pushing a little more weight here in this particular lineup to move him on up. The red calf that comes next in the lineup, deep enough body type of a calf, deep enough flank type of a calf. Now, starts to come off being just a little bit shorter bodied, a little shorter coupled from flank to flank there, a little more down right at the point of that hip, not as long and level from hooks to pins. Then the young lady's calf that comes next in this lineup, level enough top type of a calf, just the barest handling in this particular go around that you'd like to see him pushing a little more fat and finish to move on up. But a nice set of calves there in that lineup, so let's give them all another nice big round of applause. Well, let's give these exhibitors a nice big round of applause here as we come into this next class here in this market steer division. I think a nice set of steers here in this particular go-round. I think some steers we're getting some weights where they're pushing some fat and finish to them, and you're seeing how they're putting that fat and finish onto those skeletons here and how they handle that weight. But for me here to start off the class, a super complete type of a calf that I really like in terms of that overall volume and capacity. He handles himself extremely well in terms of fat and finish when you start to get towards that 12th and 13th rib, but just a very, very three-dimensional type of a calf. When you get in front of him, a load of muscle shape in terms of the way he goes down the top of that shoulder, right into the top of that shoulder there, but a lot of power in terms of internal volume and capacity to him, and you like him up on that front end through that chest floor. Just a very, very complete type of a fat finish steer here to lead off the class. Young man's calf that's going to be next here in this particular go-round, super stylish about his type and kind, and honestly, he's one you have to study a little bit, because initially when he comes in there with that white mark down his belly, at times he wants to come off being looking just a tick shallower body, but he's really not when you start to analyze him in terms of how he's designed there and starts to handle. I like him in terms of where he's handling himself as well in terms of fat and finish. I think maybe a little more uniform than some of the other calves here in this particular go-round, but super stylish about the way he gets out here. I like him in terms of his up-headedness on that front end. He balances up well here in this on the profile there. He's long-bodied, he's long-topped, he's long-hipped, and I think that's where he has an advantage over some of these other calves here in this go-round. Just a little smoother made when we get up into that front end, a little more up-headed when we get into that front end. Now, when I compare him to that class winner there, maybe not as much total volume and capacity as we get into that front, right into that forward, maybe not as much pop in terms of that overall volume to him, but I think a calf that's very, very complete in this type of kind that you like him towards the top end of this class. Young man, the calf that comes next in this lineup, a calf that I like in terms of depth of body. I think certainly he's a deep enough body, deep enough flank type of a calf. Now, I do think when we get him out here, he starts to get a little piecier in his type and kind. He starts to get a little rounder made, a little rounder out of that hip, a little shorter from hooks to pins, a little rounder about that front end. But when you put him in here, I do think he gives you just a tick more length of body than some of the other calves here in this go-round. He does give you a little more rear rib shape and dimension. Some of those other calves. Now, when I compare him to those top two here in this go-round, I don't think he's pushing as much fat and finish towards that 12th or 13th rib in comparison to those two, but that's getting critical because I think he's got a lot of volume and capacity to him that you appreciate here in this go-around. Young man's calf that comes next in the lineup. On that profile, I like this guy in terms of depth of body. I think he gives you some depth of side, he gives you some depth of flank. Now, where I get a little critical of him is I think as we work towards that front end, he starts to get a little bolder about that shoulder, a little bolder about the way he comes into the top of that shoulder, a little bolder about the top of that shoulder, and at times maybe wants to toe out just a tick more when we get him out here. But I think certainly when you get him on that profile and get that head up, get that head extended there like the young man does, you really appreciate that depth of body, depth of flank. I just like to blend him in a little bit more as we work towards that front end and blend him in a little bit more about the point of that shoulder. Young lady's calf that comes next here in this particular lineup, long body type of a calf that I really like in terms of length of side. I think certainly he's got a lot of length of stride to him. Now, when you start to watch him and then analyzing down that top line at times, maybe gets a little more down at the point of that hip. I think certainly he's a calf that's handled. He's getting to 1,500 and some pounds. I mean, he's obviously done his part to get to a fat finish steer here. Just in this particular go-round, maybe starts to flatten up in terms of the way he's designed right into that hip, not as heavily muscled right into that hip as some of those other calves here in this go-round, but I do appreciate that overall volume and capacity that he carries and that length of side that he gets out here and strides with when we put him into motion. Young lady's calf that comes next in this lineup, a little flatter made type of a steer that's long enough sided, just not as heavily muscled here in this go-around, starts to get flatter about that muscle shape into that lower quarter, not as wide based or wide tracking when we get down to those base feet and legs. Then young lady's calf that comes next in this lineup, not as evenly balanced here in this go-around, starts to get a little more down at the point of that shoulder, wants to toe out a little bit more off of those back legs, but he is a calf that's starting to give you some rear rib shape and some depth of flank. But a really nice set of calves there in that go-around, so let's give all those exhibitors another nice big round of applause.
And Class 2, we have ABDs, Colton Story, Colton Burnside, and Wyatt Story. Coming back to the finals.
Coming back right now.
For our division finals for the tributes to shown grown, we're going to start those right now.
let's give these exhibitors a nice big round of applause here as we line up these two classes here to select you a champion overall here in this county bred division. I think they told me that this was the first time they broke the show out like this, and I think this is always a good idea in terms of being able to recognize some of the local participants, the local cattle that are grown here, and I think certainly a nice representation of the cattle here in the area. As we work down through this particular division, though, there's a steer in this lineup that I just really like in terms of his parts and pieces. I think for me, really puts a lot of good qualities together here in this particular lineup. I think he really, when you start to handle him, I like him where he's at in terms of his fat and finish, but I like him in terms of his balance. I think he certainly gives you some completeness off of both ends. He gives you some stoutness off of both ends. And for me, has that market animal shape to him, just a load of rib shape to him, and honestly has some style and balance to go with that here in the lineup. So let's give these exhibitors a nice big round of applause. We'll select you a champion here in this particular division, and then we'll reline them up here and select your reserve in the go round. And as we line them up here to select your reserve here in this division, where I'm going to go is a calf that I like in terms of completeness. I think certainly we talked about in the individual class that they were in, they balance up extremely well. I think they're pushing enough fat and finish to them here in this particular lineup. You know, is it comparing to that champion? Maybe not as much total volume and capacity to him, but I think he's an awfully complete type of a fat steer. And for me, balances up extremely well, and that's where he's going to end up being the reserve here in this lineup. And then we'll continue to place them here in this go around. But let's give all these exhibitors another nice round of applause here in this particular division. I think a nice set of steers here in your lineup.
Kootenai Shoshone born Colton Story. Your grand champion, Kootenai Shoshone born Avery Deeds. We'll see both of them back tonight for the Supreme Drive.
These are market steers, non-kootenai Shoshone. London Gold. Bridger Gatton. London Hopper. Madison Rook. Mercedes Hunter. Oriah Dixon. Non-kootenai Shoshone Market Steers Class 1. To point out and give a big thanks to our beef judge sponsor, McLean Cattle. Huge thank you goes out to McLean Cattle Company for sponsoring our beef judges this year. Your generous support ensures that we maintain high standards in our beef judging, celebrating the dedication and excellence of our participants.
How are you?
I'm good.
Let's give these exhibitors a nice big round of applause here as we come into this next class here in this market steer division. A nice set of calves here, some lighter weight calves here as we start into this next division, but I think when you start to put the parts and pieces together here, the young lady's calf that leads off the class, for me, just the most complete, the most evenly balanced calf here in this particular go-round. I think certainly he's a long-bodied, long-top type of a calf that gives you a little more length of hip to him. He balances up extremely well here in terms of that length of front end. He gives you some extension out of the top of that shoulder, and a calf that's handling some fat and finish towards it in this particular lineup, towards that 12th and 13th rib here to bring him towards the top of that class. I think for me, just gives you a little more stretch to him when we get on that profile and the calf that's going to be in second. Calf that comes next in this lineup, the white marked calf there, a calf that starts to give you some evidence of depth of body to him. I think certainly he gives you some depth of flank to him. Now at times I don't think he's as long made, as long fronted as in comparison to that calf that leads off the class, but he's a stout feature type of a calf that gives you some thickness down that top line, gives you some thickness out of that hip, just not as tight made, not as smooth made up into that front end, but I think a calf that gives you some stoutness and some substance of bone that you like him in this go round. Young lady's calf that comes next in this lineup, deep enough body type of a calf that gives you some depth of body, depth of flank, just not as stout made and maybe not as powerful in terms of that skeletal width and dimension through that chest floor, and not as much power into the top of the shoulder when we analyze the calf down that top and right into the way she goes into the top of that shoulder. But a calf that gives you some overall rib shape and dimension that you do appreciate in the go round. Calf that comes next in this lineup is kind of an interesting calf here in this go round, long enough sided, long enough fronted type of a calf, just a calf that starts to flatten out in terms of overall rib shape and dimension, a little shallower bodied, a little higher flank, a little straighter moving when we flex him out of those back legs. Black and white calf that comes next in this lineup, calf that gives you some depth of side to him, but just a calf that doesn't balance up as well here, really starts to toe out a little bit more when we put him into motion, a little bolder, a little coarser about that front end, a little shorter fronted as well when we get him out on that move, when we start to analyze him in through that chest and in through that chest floor, a little heavier in through that lower brisket. Young man's calf that comes next in this lineup, long enough top type of a calf, long enough hip type of a calf, headed enough type of a calf. Honestly, I'd just like to see a little bit more of him. I'd like to see him pushing a little more fat, a little more weight here in this lineup there to move him on up. But a nice set of calves there in that particular class. So let's give all those exhibitors another nice big round of applause.
To the Idaho. Lachlan Gold. And Jaron Knopp.
we come into this next class here in this market steer division. The young lady's black calf that's going to lead off the class, just a really stylish made type of a calf that balances up extremely well here in this particular lineup. I think for me, when you start to analyze him up on that front end through that chest floor, gives you a lot of squareness, a lot of dimension in through that chest. But I like it when you get right down that top. I think he's got a lot of power to him into the top of that shoulder. Shows with him a little more muscle shape, a little more muscle dimension right over that loin edge. But when you get right behind him, gives you enough thickness in that center quarter, and he's pushing enough fat and finish to him here in this lineup that you appreciate. The red calf that comes next in this lineup, I like him on that profile as well. I think a deep enough body, deep enough flank. I do think when we start to analyze him in terms of muscle shape, a little more elongated about that muscle shape into that lower stifle, not as powerful right down deep into that lower quarter in comparison to that black calf, but he's a calf that's got some feeding ability to him. He's pushing enough fat and finish to him, and you like him in terms of that overall volume and capacity here in the lineup to move towards the top end of that class. Young man's calf that comes next in this lineup, long-bodied, long-strided type of a calf, a little more common in the terms of the way he's designed. There's nothing wrong with that. He just comes off just being a little bit coarser made up onto that front end, a little bolder about the top of that shoulder, not as smooth made when we start to get down that top line, maybe just down ever so slightly right at the point of that hip. But he's a calf that is pushing some fat and finish to him that you appreciate, and he's got some substance of bone that you really appreciate as well. Young man's calf that comes next in this lineup, deep enough body type of a calf that's pushing some fat and finish to him as well towards that 12th and 13th rib, just not as long body, not as long made as some of those other calves. You like to stretch him out just a little bit more and give him a little more length of body here in this particular class. But a nice set of calves there in that go round. So let's give them all one more nice big round of applause.
Coming back from Don Kootenai Class 2, Kaylee Idaho and Jan Knott. Like to shout out a huge congratulations to our third place average daily gain winner, Lachlan Gold, gaining more than 3.35 pounds a day. Hunter Everett. Candace Eider. Samantha Spraker. And Parker Rosenberger. Shown Farnborough, Joe Dobson, Caldwell Banker, and Kootenai Title. I want to thank those guys for sponsoring our Average Daily Gain Award. Your support helps us recognize and celebrate the hard work and dedication of our
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. What's his weight?
These exhibitors a nice big round of applause here as we come into this next class here in this market steer division. I think a nice set of calves here in this particular go round. Some cattle that are starting to get some fat finished weight to them, but as you start to analyze them here in this particular lineup, the young lady's black calf that's going to lead off the class, just really complete in the way he comes out here in this particular lineup. I think for me, gives you a lot of stoutness off of both ends, but I really like him in terms of the way he starts to handle himself towards that 12th and 13th rib. Deep body, deep flank, big internal shape and dimension to that calf. And I think for me, he balances up well in this particular lineup. He's smooth enough into that shoulder. He's up-headed enough into that particular shoulder. And I like him down that top. And I like him out of that hip in this particular lineup. And for me, that's where he's going to end up leading off this class. Young lady's black calf that comes next in this lineup. Long-bodied, long-sided type of a calf that gives you some stretch when we get him out on the move there. Long from flank to flank. He's certainly a calf that gives you some stoutness when you get right behind him. Now, I do think in comparison to the class winner here in this go-round, he starts to come off a little rounded. He's a little rounder about that muscle shape out of that hip, a little rounder down deep into that lower stifle, but a calf that really, nice job. Yep. A calf that you like in terms of overall muscle shape and dimension to him. I think it gives you a little more power in terms of thickness down that top, a little more thickness into the top of that shoulder, and I do think he's a little thicker made down deep into that lower quarter in comparison to some of the other calves here in this go-round. Nice job. Young lady's light-colored calf that comes next in the lineup, a calf that gives you some internal shape and dimension to him. I think certainly he's got some power in terms of dimension and forward to him. I think when you get in front of him, he's got enough expression up into that front, enough expression through that chest floor. Now, I get a little critical of him is when we start to get right behind him, I don't think he's as wide-based as some of those other calves that are in front of him here in this particular go-round. I think he wants to narrow up just a tick when we get down to the ground there in comparison to some of those other calves, but I think certainly when you're handling down that top line into the top of that shoulder, he's got enough thickness to him. He's got enough thickness and dimension at the top of that shoulder. Young man's calf that's next in this lineup, balance-wise, he's a balanced enough type of a steer. He's laid in smooth enough into that shoulder. He's flat enough into the top of that shoulder. Now, right now, in those three calves that beat him there, he's not got as much overall volume and capacity to him here in this particular lineup, and maybe you'd like to see him pushing just a tick more fat and finish towards that 12th and 13th rib in comparison to those others in the class, but I think certainly completeness-wise, a calf that balances up well enough here in the go-round. White marked calf that's next here in this lineup, a calf from that fore rib back you like. He's got enough rear rib shape and dimension to him. Yep, nice job. Just not as evenly balanced when we get up into that front end, a little rounder, a little coarser up into that shoulder, a little bolder through that front end, a little more open at the top of that shoulder. But a nice set of calves there in that lineup, so let's give them all another nice big round of applause. Nice job.
Non-Coogan market steers, class 4, coming in the ring. Ruby Lopez. Riley Avery. Addison Grunley. And Hazel Lopez. This is our last division class of market steers.
Give these exhibitors a nice big round of applause here as we come into this next class here in this market steer division. I think a nice set of steers here as we get into this last class here in this particular division. But as we come up on this top end, the young lady's calf that's going to lead off this class, just very complete in his overall type and kind. I think certainly a calf that gives you enough thickness and dimension down that top. He gives you enough thickness out of that hip. You like him when you get right behind him. I think he gives you enough squareness and thickness into that center quarter. But I like him, especially as we start to analyze him into that front end. I think he gives you a little more power, a little more dimension right into that forerib, a little more dimension into that heart girth. And I like him in through that chest floor. He gives you enough stoutness and dimension. And when you handle him, he's pushing enough fat and finish into that 12th and 13th rib that you appreciate him here in this particular lineup. Young lady's calf that's going to come next in this lineup, long-bodied, long-sided type of a calf that when you get right behind him, a lot of thickness in that center quarter. Now, where I get a little critical of him is I do think he starts to get a little bit tighter, a little flatter about that forerib, not as heavily expressive, and when we get into that forerib and right into that heart girth, I think you'd like to just see him power up just a tick more. When we set him out into motion, at times he wants to get just a tick straighter off those back legs when we get him out there, but I think certainly a calf that's got a lot of muscle shape down that top. He's got a lot of thickness and dimension into that center quarter that you really appreciate. Young lady's calf that comes next in this lineup, deep enough body type of a calf that gives you some depth of body, depth of flank, not as much pop or internal shape and dimension to that rib cage in comparison to some of those other calves. A little flatter ribbed in this particular lineup, but a calf that is pushing some fat and finish that you appreciate in the go-round. Young lady's calf that comes next in the lineup, deep enough body, deep enough flank type of a calf, not as heavily muscled in comparison to some of these other calves here, a little flatter muscle shape down that top line, a little flatter muscled over that loin edge as well. Then the young lady's calf that comes next in this lineup, certainly deep enough body type of a calf that's pushing enough fat and finish to it, just a calf that gets a little bit flatter about that muscle design when we get right behind him, a little bit weaker about those flank, the weaker when we set him out into motion off those back legs, wants to toe out just a little bit more in comparison, but he is a deep enough body, deep enough flank type of a calf that you appreciate. So a really nice set of calves on the lineup. Let's give them all another nice big round of applause.
Them backwards. Attitude only.
I think there's one.
Candace Ider.
This is your third.
Okay.
We'll keep her
Yep.
down
That's
here.
fine. That's fine.
Well, let's give these exhibitors a nice big round of applause here as we move into this next division here to select you a champion and reserve. As we went down through this particular division, I think certainly cattle that started to get some more weight to them and started to put the parts and pieces together, and I think you've got a really good division of cattle here in this particular go-around. Now, as we start to put these parts and pieces together here in these calves, we start to analyze some of the calves that are a little more market ready in terms of weight, where they're at, in terms of how they're handling in that fat and finish. And there's a couple calves here that are in this lineup that I think are very good and ready to go to market here in this particular lineup, but I think they have a lot of style, they have a lot of balance to them. Now, when we start to analyze them, there's one calf that when you get right behind him, I like him in terms of that thickness and dimension through that center quarter. I think he's got a lot of power when you get right behind him. But then as we get out here on the profile, there's a calf that I really like in terms of depth of body and I think depth of flank. And when I get in front of this calf, I really like him in terms of that power when you get right in front of him and through that chest floor and power into that forerib. And for me, that's where he kind of has an advantage here in this go-round. I just really like him up onto that front end. When you get right in front of him, I think he's got a tick more dimension to him, a tick more turn to him when you start analyzing that overall volume and capacity to him. And for me, that's where he's going to put the parts and pieces together. I think certainly a calf that's handling himself well enough in terms of fat and finish towards that 12th and 13th rib, but just a big rib, easy rib doing type of a calf, and a calf that you like him. When you get him out here, I think certainly he's got enough depth of body to him, he's got enough spring, but I really like him up onto that front end, the way he goes into the top of that shoulder, that looseness of rib cage and rib dimension that he carries. So with that, let's give all these exhibitors another nice big round of applause. I think a really nice set of calves here in this particular division. We'll go out and select you a champion, and then we'll reline them up here to select your reserve here in this go-round. A lot of dimension to him when you get in terms of a muscle shape out of that hip, muscle shape in that center quarter. As I mentioned, the only difference I see is up on that front end, maybe not as powerful right into that forerib in comparison to that division champion, but he's awfully good in terms of the way he's designed down that top. He's got a lot of muscle shape into the top of that shoulder, and he's long enough sided when you get him out here on the profile as well. So let's give these exhibitors one more nice big round of applause. I think a nice set of calves here in this particular division as well, and then we'll continue to place the rest of them here in this particular lineup.
them in because we got to place all of them that were placed in those
So as we
divisions.
place them, how do you want? Do you want to start?
Well, let's give all these young folks a nice big round of applause here as we line up your division champions here to select you a champion overall market steer. I want to compliment the young folks here for a really nice job here, a really nice go around in terms of getting out here, getting the cattle presented. They've been very cordial to work with. I appreciate the invitation to come back. Last year was the first time I had made a trip to Idaho, so I appreciate the invitation to come back, and I appreciate the young folks working through them. They've always been very cordial and very pleasant to work with as you work through the livestock show. And honestly, that's not, you don't see that all the time, so it's, from my angle, it's appreciative to come here and take a look. But as we went through each of those divisions and each of those classes there, in my mind we tried to find some cattle that had some completeness to them, that had some dimension to them, that had some muscle shape, but we're pushing some fat and finish to them in terms of market readiness and ready to go onto the rail. And in terms of being ready to push that, this is a fat finish show, so we want those cattle to have as much fat and finish to them as we can, but certainly have that style and balance in the show ring and show ring appeal. Now, as we start to put these parts and pieces together here to select you a champion here in the go-around, there's a calf, there's a couple of them here in this go-around. I think each of these calves came out of their individual divisions where, they stood out in my mind in terms of having that skeletal width and dimension, having that fat and finish to them, but having some show ring presence to them as well. I think they were balanced enough in their type and kind. I think certainly smooth enough up into that front end and gave you enough internal shape and dimension. But as we start to put them together here in this lineup, there's a calf that I like in the lineup that I've liked in their class and in their division. And I think they get back out here, they hold their own as well. I think when you get right behind them, they're thick enough made. I think all three of these calves have enough muscle to them. Obviously some differences of how they put them onto the skeleton. But as we start to talk about dimension and picking a champion, there's a calf that when we get him out here, I think certainly on that profile, he balances up well. I think it gives you maybe just a tick more tightness through that chest floor, a little more tightness in through that brisket area. I think a calf, when you get right in front of him, a load of dimension in through that chest floor into that forerib. And I think certainly he has that internal volume and capacity that you really appreciate. And I think for me, that's where he's going to end up being the champion here in this lineup. But before we go out and make a champion, let's give a nice round of applause for the folks behind the scenes as well, helping to make the show work and get everything here. I think they've done a nice job getting the cattle to the ring here. But make sure before you end your week, you say a big thank you to those folks behind the scenes, because oftentimes that's a thankless job behind the scenes, and we oftentimes forget to say thank you. And without those folks and those supporters, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. But certainly it's been a pleasure to be here with you this morning to evaluate your steer show. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the quality of livestock that you had here. Well, let's give the kids one more nice big round of applause. We'll go out and select you a champion, and then we'll reline them up here and select your reserve in the go-around.
'24 Idaho State Fair Supreme Champion Avery Deeds.
Individual division as well. I think certainly he's got enough rib shape and dimension to him. I think in terms of volume and capacity, a lot like that champion here in this go-around. He's got a lot of turn of rear rib shape to it. Maybe not as clean right down deep into that lower chest floor, but I think that's getting extremely critical because this guy has a lot of muscle shape to him. He has a lot of fatness and finish to him towards that 12th and 13th rib. And for me, those are kind of the things that brought him towards the top end of this particular show. But once again, it's been a pleasure to be here with you. Let's give these kids a nice big round of applause. I think they've done a great job. And it's always great to see kids out here involved in livestock and being the future of agriculture. We'll go out and select your reserve overall here in the lineup, and then we'll continue to place the rest of them down the line.